listener production.
This episode contains references to drug use and strong language.
Hi, Holly Mitchell with you. Welcome to The Briefing. In 2021, a neatly dressed man in his 60s walks into a Sydney police station. He looks like a regular guy, but police are stunned. This isn't just any man. It's Darko Desic, a fugitive who escaped from Grafton Prison with a hacksaw and bolt cutters 3 decades earlier. A man who was a prolific weed grower. A man who lived in hiding for 30 years, right under the noses of police. How did he do it? How did he evade capture for so long? And why, after all that time, did he finally give himself up? That's what journalist Tim Elliott set out to uncover in the latest season of Listener's documentary series, Secrets We Keep. In Secrets We Keep Jailbreak, Tim Elliott takes you inside Darko's extraordinary true story, from his escape and life on the run to the secrets of survival that made him a legend on Sydney's northern beaches. Today, we want to share the first episode of the series with you, Jailbreak, You've Been Looking for Me.
It's a spring afternoon in September 2021. Darko Desic walks into the DY police station on Sydney's northern beaches. He's dressed in a smart brown jacket and black jeans. He looks to be in his 60s, with a long, lean face and short, silvery beard neatly trimmed.
Can I help you, sir?
My name is Darko Desic. I want to give myself up.
Excuse me?
I'm Darko Desic. You've been looking for me.
Looking for you? What for?
I said I escaped from jail 30 years ago.
You escaped from jail? What jail?
I escaped from Grafton.
Okay. Just let me look you up here. There's no record of a Darko Desic here. No record of any escape.
Can you check again? I escaped from Grafton. I'm giving myself... I've escaped. You've been looking. Police has been looking for me. I've been almost wanted.
Most Wanted, as in Australia's Most Wanted, a popular TV cop show profiling the country's most dangerous or elusive fugitives. The police officer doesn't know what to think. Is this for real? Like, here's a guy claiming to have escaped from prison 30 years before and who is now voluntarily giving himself up. Who does that?
Wait here.
The policeman walks into a room at the back of the station. Half an hour later, he returns with another officer.
They come back, and then one cop came with a fucking newspaper clip about me. He said, because there was a picture, said, that must be you. And the other cop made a fun and said, yeah, he's got same eyebrows. Laughing, fucking cops. But I didn't say nothing because I was pissed off. I got same eyebrows. I would have fucking told him, you got same arse as when you're fucking 18. It's big, very well fed, but I didn't say nothing,
And so the duty officers make what will most likely be the easiest arrest of their careers.
So they took my fingerprints, took them 2-3 hours. Then other people came, even inspector, and the cop said, wow, you've done well. Honest to God truth. And they look at me all like this. What you fucking done?
Darko is then driven to Sydney Police Area Command in the city, where he is formally charged with escape from lawful custody. A few days later, details of his case begin to emerge.
A drug dealer who escaped from jail, Desic became a wanted man after he used bolt cutters and a hacksaw to escape a Grafton jail
on the run, but one day he realised he couldn't
was arrested for supplying cannabis and sentenced to 3 years jail.
His story became global news.
Desic was 35 when he escaped from a century-old prison in Grafton, north of Sydney.
Por temores reales a Darko Desic had walked into a Sydney police station to give himself up almost 30 years after he used a hacksaw blade and bolt cutters to escape from prison, officers said. Darko Desic...
Journalists, including me, scrambled for interviews. I was working at the time at the Sydney Morning Herald, one of Australia's main daily newspapers. The Herald, along with virtually every other news outlet in Australia, was trying to get in touch with Darko. But he was in prison, and in Australia, contact with inmates is impossible unless you're a relative or a friend. Talent agents were also circling. Apparently, Russell Crowe wanted to make a movie about him. But most of what people were hearing wasn't from Darko. It was gossip, rumours largely, coming out of the small community of Avalon on Sydney's northern beaches, where Darko had been living and where he'd been embraced as something of a folk hero. The locals there knew him as Dougie. Indeed, the more famous Dougie became, the more Russell Crowe got mentioned, the more friends Dougie had. Suddenly, everyone knew him and everybody loved him.
He's one of us. He's a loved member of community, very well loved by so many people.
Who was this man who had escaped from jail 30 years ago? How did he live on the run for so long? And how did he become such a legend? I wanted to know Darko's story, the real story. What was fact and what was fiction? I got the feeling there was a lot more going on here than met the eye. I'm Tim Elliott. This is Secrets We Keep, Jailbreak. Ever since reading about Darko in those initial news reports, I'd been dying to meet the guy. I had so many questions. He'd gone to jail for growing weed, and I'm not talking just a few little plants in his backyard. Apparently, he single-handedly grew hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of the stuff. The news reports said that he'd cut his way out of prison with a hacksaw and bolt cutters. Like, how do you do that? This was the 1990s, not the Count of Monte Cristo. Word was that he'd prepared for his escape by doing endless push-ups and pull-ups and jogging around the prison yard, that he'd obsessively practiced martial arts. I'd also read that after busting out, he'd been so worried about being caught that he never registered for Medicare. And so when his teeth became rotten, he'd pull them out with pliers. Like pliers! What else had this guy done to himself? Darko stayed on the run for 30 years without revealing his true identity. For someone like me who can't keep a secret for 7 seconds, the sheer discipline of this astounded me. But there's another reason I was obsessed. I've always loved escape stories. The Hollywood classics like The Great Escape, the World War II film with Steve McQueen.
Hills, isn't it?
Captain Hills, actually.
17 escape attempts.
And most of all, the 1973 film Papillon.
Welcome to the penal colony of French Guiana, from which there is no escape.
Papillon is about a French guy, Henri Charrière, a Parisian safecracker who is falsely convicted of murder in the 1930s. He's imprisoned on the epic hellhole of Devil's Island and spends years trying to escape before finally pulling it off. Oddly enough, Charrière is also played by Steve McQueen. It's a true story and I highly recommend it. Anyway, I could see something of Papillon in Darko. He never gave up. Until, of course, he gave up. But you know what I mean. After he handed himself in, Darko served almost 2 years in prison. He was let out in December 2022. Once I heard he'd been released, I became determined to track him down. I needed to know how Darko had pulled this off. Cutting through metal bars with a hacksaw? That's so Hollywood. That sounds like fiction to me. Did he have accomplices? Or was Darko just making this bullshit up? But finding him was not going to be easy. After all, it's hard to find a guy who really doesn't want to be found, especially when his main skill is not being found. I heard that he'd returned to Avalon on Sydney's northern beaches, a 30-kilometre long peninsula separated from the rest of the city by a hydraulic drawbridge. Once you cross that bridge, you're in a different Sydney altogether, with secluded coves and cliffs, all cobalt blues and iridescent greens, and beaches with names like Curl Curl, Mona Vale, Bilgola and Bungan. As you drive up the peninsula, the road gets windier and the bush gets thicker. By the time you reach Avalon, one of the very last beaches heading north, you're essentially in rainforest, with lyrebirds, possums and lizards, and overgrown pockets of bushland hiding weatherboard houses from the 1950s and 60s. There's plenty of money here now as well. Millionaires, film directors, investment bankers. But Avalon, like all the beaches here, is heavily localised. No one gives a shit if you're from another suburb 3 beaches away. If you don't surf all the time at Avalon, if you don't drink all the time at Avalon RSL, then you are not from Avalon. You are not a local. The fact then that I actually live on the northern beaches and have surfed here all my life didn't afford me any privileges when it came to finding Darko. But I did have one lead, a journalist called Steve, who'd lived in Avalon for years. Steve put me in touch with a fabulously wealthy local man who I'm going to call Eric, and whose words we've had voiced by an actor. Eric was standoffish.
It's been so overwhelming for him, all the publicity. He's a very private person.
When Darko came out of prison, Eric had apparently taken him under his wing. He told me that he'd already been bombarded with calls from journalists, but that Darko, or Dougie as he knew him, wasn't talking with anyone.
But I'll tell you what I'll do. You send me some of your stories, I'll pass them on to Dougie and see whether he wants to talk to you.
I emailed Eric some of my stories. As every journalist knows, there's a bit of a dance that goes on at this stage. I needed to win Darko's trust and certainly not scare him off. Sending him an expose on the drug trade was clearly a no-no. I opted then for sympathetic profile pieces, one on the leader of a homeless charity and another on a campaigning climate scientist. But I didn't hear anything back for a month. I called Eric, but he didn't have any news. More months passed. Then more months. A full year went by. I'd pretty much given up on Darko when, out of the blue, I get a call from Eric telling me,
Dougie wants to meet with you.
Eric gave me an address out in the country on a rural property about 2 hours' drive northwest of Sydney.
Keep it to yourself, yeah?
And so I headed out one Saturday in August 2024 with some pens and a notepad, some recording gear that I'd borrowed from a friend that I didn't really know how to operate, and a head swirling with questions.
You want to have a coffee?
Yeah, I'll have a coffee, yeah. So here I am, finally, with Darko. Weed grower, prison escapee, former fugitive. The newspapers made him look softer, more grandfatherly almost. But in person he's leaner, with sharper features and a wily fox-like squint. Not dissimilar, as it happens, to Papillon. We're sitting in a timber, one-bedroom house, looking out the door at a row of poplars and some horses grazing in a lush green paddock.
Yeah, if you can go there too much, I don't like being too close. I need my...
You need space.
I need
so do I.
Yeah.
It's a simple place, but it suits Darko just fine. There's a bed at one end of the room, a sink and a fridge at the other, and a bathroom off to the side. The only material possessions I can see are a computer on his bed and a guitar in the corner.
I actually started doing quite a bit of classical guitar. Yeah, I play guitar. I haven't practiced for a while. I listen to rock and roll too. I like Jeff Beck. Clapton is not too bad. English rock, blues, jazz. I like Django.
Django Reinhardt.
Yeah, I like Django. His technique is just 2 fingers, and
I didn't know he played with 2 fingers.
Yeah, he burned his hand. He plays only with 2 fingers. Incredible. But that technique, he gave him a different flavor. Without that, he would be still great, but
not the same.
Yeah. So impediment, he turned into the advantage. Brilliant.
I notice there's no TV.
I haven't watched TV for 30 years. I don't watch TV. I do research.
And no sign of other human beings. Darko tells me that he's no good at small talk.
I talk stuff that people don't have an interest in.
Like?
Calculus. How to explain infinity. Take a frog 1 meter from the wall.
Okay, so we have a frog 1 meter from a wall.
Each time she jumps half a distance. So first meter, she jumps the half.
So we're talking the riddle of the infinity frog, which comes from ancient Greek philosophy, I think.
Then she jumps the half of half. Half of half, half of half. When she will get there? Never. She can jump as many times as it can, but she will never reach.
As fascinating as this is, unlike the frog, my time is not infinite. I want to talk to Darko about the drug dealing, about how he got caught, how he escaped, how he lived as a fugitive for so long. What about all the stories on TV about how everyone in Avalon said they knew him? Dougie this, Dougie that. How they'd seen him every day walking down the main street or sitting at cafes drinking coffee.
No, they made the stories. People made stories. We saw him in a coffee shop buying coffee, which is not true. I never went. I didn't have enough money.
There were stories about Dougie talking to kids.
That was a funny one. We saw Dougie. Even kids said they knew me. The fucking kids, I never talked to kids.
It seems like no one really knew Darko. How could they? He'd been a virtual ghost for 30 years, living by omission and erasure, hiding in plain sight, clothed in shadows and half-truths. Dougie wasn't Darko. So who was Darko? It's the early 1960s in Cold War Europe.
Well, I grew up in a small fishing village on the Adriatic coast, which was lovely. The village was called Jablanac. It's quite nice, beautiful place. Cypresses all around. Beautiful childhood. Best memories.
Jablanac is on the north coast of what was then called Yugoslavia. Italy's not far away, just a few hundred kilometres west across the Adriatic Sea.
But it was a good, small little community. A couple of hundred people. Relatively poor, because there was not much income from nowhere. If you ever see the Greece islands, that's how it looked like.
At the time, Yugoslavia was a federation made up of 6 smaller republics. Each was kind of like a country in its own right. One of them was Croatia, where Darko grew up.
My mother was a teacher of Croatian language, and father was just a machinist working with machines. A generator, basically, because electricity was very scarce.
Yugoslavia was a socialist country sandwiched between Western Europe and the former Soviet Union, which was under the control of Russia. Under socialism, personal freedoms in Yugoslavia were limited, and the government kept a tight grip on politics, industry, and the media. But the regime was much less oppressive than in the Soviet Union. Darko was a smart kid and happy enough with his own company.
My father used to tell me, go son, go among the people, enjoy yourself, you're always by yourself. But I always like to walk, never with people. But my father was worried. Why don't you go meet the people? I walked, always thinking. I got very much affinity from philosophy. And when I was 9 or 10, we moved in a bigger town where I could get better education. So there I finished my primary school when I was 15. Unfortunately, my mother died when I was 15. She was only 35, breast cancer.
Darko doesn't go into much detail about his mother's death. I get the impression it had scarred him deeply. And not surprisingly, there he was, a 15-year-old boy living mostly in his mind with his books and philosophy. And then one of his most important human connections was suddenly gone.
Which affected me later on. I had trouble after my mother died finding my goal. What to study. I was good in writing poetry, all this stuff. And actually, when my father went to school, he said, I don't know what my son should do further studying.
His dad, Vinko, asked Darko if he wanted to be a lawyer.
No.
Darko, it seems, had loftier goals.
And I told him I should become a professor of literature and philosophy.
But Vinko wasn't so sure.
And my father thought, well, best is to do something more hands-on. And
something more potentially lucrative.
Yeah.
Darko always had an ability to work with spaces, in his mind that is, to visualise angles and different aspects. Quite handy, as it happened, for someone who would, many years later, need to find his way out of a confined space.
In my mind, I can cut things. I had that ability to, create things in my mind.
So Darko's dad tested him.
He said, can you draw the cross-section of the piston? So I cut it, put it on a paper, and my father said, you're going to be an engineer. So I went to engineering school and finished the degree with honors. It's basically an engineering degree, but it was for ships, huge power plants and diesel engines. That's what I specialized.
Darko graduated in 1979. After his degree, he started his military service, which was compulsory in Yugoslavia for all men between 18 and 27.
Army used to always come and test us. First I applied to be a pilot. They accepted me. My father said, no, you're not going to be a pilot.
Why didn't he want you?
No, because it's a dangerous job.
Oh.
It's a fighter pilot. It's not like a commercial pilot. But I did some tests. When I went to Army, somehow I became a commissar. That means it's a guy who is responsible for communist education. So I was preaching communism. Can you believe it?
For those of us lucky enough not to have grown up in a socialist dictatorship, a commissar is a figure of considerable authority, one who enforces conformity and morale. A commissar has an almost pastoral role. They are ideological shepherds who also keep a very, very close eye on their flocks. This requires not only a close level of surveillance, but even, on occasion, informing on fellow recruits.
But see, when I first read a communist book about what I have to teach, I realized this is like a religion. There is no substance to it, because premise was that when man develops higher consciousness and all the means of production are at a higher level, there will be an equal society.
Well, that was the theory of communism.
I turn around. There is no man with higher consciousness, and there are no means of higher level production and higher level mind, but I got a gist of it. I become very good. Preacher can preach about God without believing in it. But I was very good. So they let me a bit earlier, and they gave me a rank.
Darko was sent to guard an airport in the south of Yugoslavia, near the border with Greece. At the time, Yugoslavia was a complicated place, politically and ethnically. Each of the different regions within the Federation had their own identities. They spoke different languages and had different beliefs. There were Catholics, Orthodox Christians and Muslims. And all of it was held together by military strongman Joseph Broz Tito.
Tito buckled down to the problems which were Yugoslavia's own.
Tito was a charismatic figure, handsome in a Slavic Bond villain kind of way, with a penchant for Cuban cigars and aviator sunglasses, and an enormous diamond ring that he wore on his left hand.
Tito was basically a dictator, but let's call it benevolent. He wasn't like Stalin.
Tito had prison camps and secret police, but he also allowed the occasional student protest, and he tolerated a certain degree of criticism. Most importantly, he held Yugoslavia together. But in 1980, just when Darko was due to get out of the army...
Today in Yugoslavia, mounting anxiety over the condition of President Tito and uncertainty over what may happen once he leaves the scene.
Belgrade is calm, but there's no mistaking the concern about whether the 87-year-old Marshal Tito will be around much longer after the unsuccessful surgery on his left leg.
President Tito of Yugoslavia buried in the rose garden of his home.
Among the impressions which stand out was the very real grief and sense of personal loss of hundreds of thousands of ordinary people to whom Tito was a leader and a hero.
Tito's funeral brought leaders from across the world to Belgrade, but some Croatians who'd fled Yugoslavia were actually celebrating.
200 of them gathered in front of Parliament House for what they described as an act of rejoicing, claiming that Tito was a mass murderer who'd hoodwinked the world.
It was a scary time. Maybe with Yugoslavia vulnerable, the Russians would invade.
And we all went to the front for weeks and weeks, sleeping in the cold.
Tito's death would have geopolitical resonance, sending shockwaves through Cold War Europe. But Darko wasn't thinking in world historical terms. Having just got out of the army, what he really needed was a paycheck.
And my first job was with Dow Chemical Company. I specialized in ordering parts for hypercompressors. You have to know what you're doing because it's very dangerous if compressor or pipe explodes.
But his mother's death still haunted him. His father, Vinko, had also remarried by this time. And just reading between the lines here, Darko wasn't a huge fan of his stepmom. And so in 1983, he hit the road.
I wanted to get out of Croatia to forget all about pain that I suffered from my mother's death.
To outrun his grief, Darko travelled to Switzerland, Germany, then Australia.
I thought if I start everything new, see, that's naivety of youth, that you can disconnect your past if you start something new. But your past is always in your mind.
Australia must have felt like a different planet. No food rationing, no fuel quotas, no secret police. In Sydney, Darko checked in with his cousin. Soon after, he travelled north to stay with his uncle Nicola, who was living near Nambucca on the New South Wales north coast. The Nambucca Valley, 500 kilometres from Sydney, is more or less subtropical. It's hot, humid, with plenty of fertile valleys and secluded bush. It's also well known for growing weed. Over the decades, police have ripped tens of millions of dollars of marijuana out of the ground here. Suspicion would even fall on Nicola, who was, some years later, dobbed in by a family member for growing weed himself. During this time, Darko certainly made some interesting friends.
I went to the North Coast and I met one old hippie called Chris. And he was a strange guy. He lived up on a mountain, he had a hang glider, we used to fly all around.
Chris grew weed for a living.
We used to fly a hang glider, he used to shoot at him because he was looking for a spot.
That's right. Chris used a hang glider to scout places to grow, and farmers would shoot at him. Anyway, Darko became fascinated with Chris. Apparently, he kept a collection of dried frogs in a box. Darko and Chris would get stoned and hang around, looking at the frogs and flying hang gliders.
He was a funny guy, and I went to talk to him.
But it was the weed that most interested Darko.
All what I needed was a bike, tent, seeds. I got some seeds, I got my bike, and he showed me how to grow. He said, you can make good money with this.
Good money, eh? What could possibly go wrong? Next time on Jailbreak.
And it was a boom. I grew so much I could not pull it out. And I was making good money.
Darko wanted more.
I wanted to be rich. I'm going to buy myself a house at the Palm Beach.
But things started to unravel.
I got greedy, Tim. A house in Palm Beach is expensive.
That was episode 1 of Secrets We Keep, Jailbreak. If you're hooked and want more, search Secrets We Keep wherever you get your podcasts to get straight into episode 2. We've popped the links in the show notes. That's it for this episode. We'll be back in your feed with headlines and a deep dive tomorrow morning. I'm Holly Mitchell. See you next time.